missed the polling threshold to be on the debate stage next week. What are your plans for that night?
Well, first off, I'm not all that shocked given that I haven't spent one day or $1 in Iowa. And so the fact that I didn't make the polling threshold was not something I was ever trying to do in Iowa. So that's fine. Nikki and Ron can debate that night. And given the fact that Donald Trump is not going to do a town hall on Fox News, I don't even know who's going to be watching Nikki and Ron in that debate. But I hope some people are, because I think they'll get a real sense of the fact that the two of them are living in an alternate universe. They will debate each other as if the contest is between the two of them. And my guess is that neither one of them will spend, 5 minutes bringing up Donald Trump because they're both playing for 2028 or a vice presidential nomination, in Nikki's case, from Donald Trump. And so, I don't think it'll be worth watching.
So you've heard all this talk within the Republican Party that it needs to be a two-person race. That if you really want to take out Donald Trump, it's got to be one of you against Donald Trump. Making the case against him, one of your old friends, Governor Christie of New Hampshire, a place where you have put a lot of your time and effort, has said effectively you should get out of the race and make way for Nikki Haley, in his estimation. Here's what the governor said.
Christie's a friend, but his race is at an absolute dead end. He's going to say anything he can. This is a two-person race, right? It's between Trump and Nikki Haley. Everyone understands that. Chris is only talking about Trump. That's it. He's kind of a one-man show, and I know he says he wants to stay in the race to speak the truth about Trump, but that translating to votes in a primary is a very different thing.
So what do you say to your good friend, Governor Sununu?
Well, that's when you know in politics that someone's going to knife you in the back, is when they start off.
Always.
Oh, he's my good friend, Look, I remember when Chris used to care about Donald Trump. He's a guy who came, I think, to the Gridiron Club and said that Trump belonged in a mental institution. And now he's saying that he'd vote for him if he were the nominee. And he's now supporting a candidate who said he was the right president at the right time and that she would pardon him before any evidence is presented to a court or a jury. Look, I believe that those folks are right, Willie, what you mentioned in your question, which is that someone's got to be one-on-one against Trump, but they actually have to be against Trump. And the problem for Nikki Haley is, and it goes to everything she talks about, she doesn't want to offend anybody. Okay, so her whole campaign has been about not offending anyone. I heard her on New Hampshire radio yesterday morning when talking about the slavery Civil War question she was asked. Now her excuse is, I was tired and a little off my game. That means that she didn't have the script that her staff has put in front of her to actually be able to read it. We've had that before in the White House. We don't need it again. And the fact is, she should be willing to stand up and say, if you're opposed to Donald Trump, you're opposed to Donald Trump. And for Christie to say, I'm obsessed with Donald Trump, when he came to a media event in Washington, D.C., and called him effing crazy, right? I don't know. I've never said that. And I think that the problem is, ever since Chris has, started to support Nikki, he's decided to adopt her offend no one positions. So, look, he's all in. They got big endorsements last night. He convinced his father and his brother to endorse Nikki Haley. So that must have been quite the arm wrestling match at the New Year's Eve party at the Sununu house.
So a couple of questions. The first one that arises off of what you just said, Governor Sununu did indeed say that if it were Biden versus Trump in the fall, he would vote for Donald Trump.
Right.
If it's Biden versus Trump in the fall, would you vote for Donald Trump?
No.
So what is it about various Republican candidates for the presidency who live with the knowledge of what Trump has done to the country, the damage that he's done to this country that will ensue for God knows how long? What is it about them that causes them to just knee-jerk reaction? Oh, yeah, I'd vote for Trump anyway.
It's an interesting combination of two emotions, Mike, fear and ambition. So the fear part of it is that all of them treasure their titles. And so they treasure their titles more than they treasure the honor that's given to them by the people to actually have those titles. And they don't want to lose them, and they're all worried about being primaried by someone who would have Donald Trump's endorsement. Second, and this is where it applies in both Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis' position, but most particularly Nikki, is ambition. The fact is that she's been asked over and over again in New Hampshire and elsewhere. In fact, she got asked by a 9-year-old kid last week in New Hampshire, would you take the vice presidential nomination from Donald Trump? And she wouldn't answer the question. What that tells you, you guys know this in politics, when we won't rule something out, that means we're ruling it in. And so that ambition, that unbridled ambition to either be his vice presidential nominee or be the nominee in 2028, so she doesn't want to offend any people who are supporting Donald Trump right now. That's not the formula for beating Donald Trump in 2024. And so to anybody who, talks about the race should be one-on-one, like Christie, if there was someone else other than me who had been willing to take on Donald Trump and tell the truth about him, I might consider getting out of the race. But there isn't. And so since there isn't, someone has to do it, and I'm going to do it.
And the toughest criticism we've seen of Donald Trump from Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis, Mika, is that he won't show up at the debate, which is a pretty safe place to criticize him.
I'm sure he's wounded by that, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Chris, I appreciate what you're doing because there are a lot of lies being promoted by Donald Trump and his followers and cronies and even lawmakers on Capitol Hill who can't seem to face the truth about our Constitution and our values. I'm curious about the Fox News town hall, and if you're at all hopeful. I mean, Fox settled with Dominion $787 million for promoting lies. So they paid big for sort of getting in bed with Trump's lies. But he's going to be interviewed by two journalists who are really talented, committed journalists. Is there any hope that he will actually be called out when he tries to tell a lie on stage?
Yeah, look, I actually have great respect for both Brett and Martha. And I think that they'll really ask him very direct questions. And look, you may remember, I think it was this past summer that Brett had an interview with him. And Brett went after him pretty hard. And Trump complained for weeks afterwards about how unfair Brett was. But when he's looking to distract from the debate in Iowa that he's too gutless to participate in, he's willing to go back to Fox and do that. And let's face it, Fox is looking for ratings because, the first two debates that they did, they didn't do a fabulous job on, frankly. I thought the last two were better and more substantive than the first two were. And they're looking to get themselves back in this game somehow because in New Hampshire, there's going to be two debates within 7 days. And one's going to be done by CNN, one's going to be done by ABC. So, both of them had an incentive to do it. But I think, look, I have a lot of faith in Brett and Martha. I think they'll ask him some pretty tough questions. What I'm also confident of is that Donald Trump will not tell the truth, will not answer the questions. Right. At some point, people need to see in the Republican Party what this is going to be like. The E. Jean Carroll case is going to start in a couple of weeks. He's lost his appeals there. He's now going to be fighting to get on the ballot in a lot of states. He is going to lose this federal immunity appeal that he has. I think the D.C. Circuit will expedite it. And my guess, Mika, is that the United States Supreme Court won't even hear it. Yeah. My guess is they'll just support what the D.C. Circuit does so they don't have to get involved in it. And so here we're going to have probably, instead of March now, probably April, you're going to have that trial going on. Anybody thinks I'm getting out of this race, they're crazy. All this stuff is going to happen. And eventually, I think a large number of Republican voters are going to say, this is destined to reelect Joe Biden. That's something that I think is one of the only things that unites most Republicans is that they don't want to reelect Joe Biden. And so I'm going to continue to fight this as the only person who's taking him on directly. And Nikki can play for his vice presidential nomination.
You mentioned the ballot access questions here. Where are you on the case in Maine? We're going to have the Secretary of State on about an hour from now. Did she make the right call there? Do you think she's got the authority and the power to do what she did, saying he wasn't convicted of insurrection, but I believe based on available evidence that he participated in, engaged in insurrection under the 14th Amendment, shouldn't be on our ballot. Same idea in Colorado. Are those the right calls to keep him off the ballot?
Well, you break it up a little bit, Willie. I don't think there needs to be a conviction. The Constitution doesn't say there needs to be a conviction, right? In the same way, there doesn't need to be a conviction if you're not 35 and you're running for president. And there doesn't need to be a conviction if you're not a natural-born American citizen. Those things are kind of self-executing. Now, I think there's a bigger policy question here about whether or not we really want the courts to make this judgment as opposed to the voters, given how divided our country is and how difficult this moment is. And I would rather have the voters make the decision to kick Donald Trump out. But if you're talking about legally what it looks like, I think the Colorado Supreme Court decision, while I disagree with it from a policy perspective, there is a legal basis for doing what they're doing. And the question is, will the United States Supreme Court deal with that either? Look, I think John Roberts, having gone through what's gone on in the court over the last number of years, having looked back on the court in the Bush versus Gore matter, is going to try as hard as he can to keep the court out of this if he can. If he can't, they'll deal with it. But I think they're going to try to let the D.C. Circuit deal with most of this stuff and see if they can stay away.
Jonathan Lemire's got a question for you, Governor. John?
Governor Christie, good to see you. I just want to follow up on something you just said a moment ago. Certainly you're resisting calls to drop out pre-New Hampshire. You've made that case very clear. But you just said that you plan to stay in, through potentially the Trump legal process, which we don't know when it could occur, but it certainly wouldn't be before March, April, and beyond. So do you see yourself riding this all the way to the convention, even if, you have struggled to attract delegates at that point?
Well, look, John, I think we're going to make that evaluation as we go along. But at some point, as this stuff starts to fall apart, the Republican voters are going to need an alternative who has made it very clear that they're against Donald Trump and that they predicted this was going to happen all along. And I've been saying it ever since I got into the race, unlike anybody else in the race. And so, this is never going to be easy. When I got into the race, I said everybody is an underdog. And that's why this kind of sophistry about who should get out of the race is kind of ridiculous. I mean, in the end, everyone is a long shot in this race, but Donald Trump on the Republican side, if you believe the polling. And so the question is, who's standing on principle? Who's going to do what's right for the party? I view this as a fight for not only the soul of my party, but for the soul of our country. And who are we going to be? What kind of government do we want? And so why should that fight be determined by polls? I'd rather have people vote. And look, I've won and I've lost. Winning's better. But I know when I'm losing. And if I lose, then I'm going to have to reevaluate, all of this. But I haven't lost anything yet. And fact is, I've qualified for every debate that was a national debate. I've qualified for both of the New Hampshire debates that'll be coming up in the week between Iowa and New Hampshire. I've met every mark that you needed to make that have been artificially set either by the RNC or by some of the networks. And the only place where I didn't meet it was in a place like Iowa, where I haven't campaigned, run one TV commercial, or even shown up. I have not been on terra firma in Iowa, in the year 2023 or 2024, and I don't expect I will be. So every place where I've campaigned and worked, we've been able to qualify for debates, and I think we've made a difference in those debates, and we're going to continue to work hard.
If it makes you feel any better, I have already put evac on alert. He's ready to go if it comes to that. General, I can assure you.
Hey, General, let me into the war room to see you, so I had to hack my way onto this frequency.
This better be critical, Wheelie.
So, come on, what is it now, please? Okay, couple of things. I'm running low on the double. I was thinking about taking a couple of months sick leave, maybe starting today. And, oh yeah. I intercepted a transmission from Megatron.
Then send it through.
Yes, sir, right away, sir. And so I'll assume that we're going on to let us know.
This is your last warning, insects. Relinquish what remains of the Allspark.
So who's the insect? You? What? Who's the insect?
Protect you. They were defeated on our world, and we will defeat them here.
This
was just a diversion. Security, please bring up. Rabbit, she's already inside. Deeds! Give me an update on that reserve. Boss readiness. What was his name? What was it?
Evac, sir.
Evac.
She's right in front.
We are facing a heavy sustained attack. They appear to be after the Allspark. General! General! Need this immediately, General. Evacuate. Hold on. National security advisory. Stay down. Pushing it out. Something